The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. At that time, the disciples came to Jesus and said, "Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" And he called a child to himself and set the child before them and said, "Truly, I say to you, unless you are converted and become like little children, you will not even enter the kingdom of heaven. Whoever then humbles himself as this child, he is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And whoever receives one such child in my name receives me." Words inspired by God. As a small child, and as a young boy, and even as a teenager, I was totally convinced that the three greatest blessings that could be bestowed by God on any human being was to be born Catholic, Irish, and from Cork. I'm not joking you. I was totally convinced that there was no greater blessing than to be born Catholic, Irish, and Cork. We have a saying, in fact, in Gaelic that says, "Má bhíonn tú an éiring bí sa bhón, cos má bhíonn tú sa bhón bí a gorchaig," which means, if you're going to be in Ireland, be in Munster, which was the province that I came from, and if you're going to be in Munster, be in Cork, which was the county I came from. So we were totally convinced that, being born in Cork, that was kind of the icing on the cake. So in ascending order of importance, it was being born Catholic, being born Irish, and being born in Cork. And I really believed it. That's what drove me in the early part of my life. So I want to talk about that today in some senses. We all start off with some kind of a belief system. We're marinated in it by the culture in which we grew up. The question becomes, at what stage do we examine that? And at what stage do we outgrow the limitations or the prejudices of our birth circumstances in order to continue to develop? So that's what I want to address today. I'm going to make just three main points this morning. Firstly, I'll talk about a few theories of developmental psychology. And then secondly, I'm going to give you a theory of my own, a theory of development psychology of my own. And then I'm going to just trace part of my own journey in those models. So the first one then, theories of developmental psychology. And I want to impress upon us first that there are many, many different theories. And it's like, I would watch my grandmother when I was growing up. I lived with my grandmother for the first 6 years. She was a very, very good pastry chef. And on a regular basis, she'd make dough and she'd roll it out with a rolling pin or whatever. And then she had all these cookie cutters in different shapes. Sometimes it was a triangle. Sometimes it was a square. Sometimes it was a circle. Sometimes it was a polygon. And she just jabbed those onto the pastry and we got different kinds of cookies. But it was all the same dough. So in some senses, no matter what developmental theory you have, it's all dealing with the same dough. It's all dealing with the fact that we all live our lives. We do the same thing in many other ways. If it's really, really hot, and I'm talking to Ireland, and they say, "How hot is it right now?" And I say it's 104. They say, "Oh my God almighty, 104? I'm talking Fahrenheit, and they're thinking centigrade. 104 here is 40 degrees centigrade back in Ireland. So, my God almighty. So it's the same temperature, we're just using a different cookie cutter. Or you take languages. If I'm feeling kind of hungry, peckish, and I'm speaking English, I say, "I'm hungry." If I'm talking Gaelic, I'm going to say, "Ta ochrasarum." If I'm talking Swahili, I'll say, "Nasiki anja." And if I'm talking Mongolian, what do I say? Piaget. It's the same message. We're hungry. And so all of these models, in some senses, they're all dealing with the dough, the same dough. We're just using different cookie cutters to kind of splice it up. And they're kind of interesting. So the first one I want to mention would be the Freudian notion. Freud believed that we evolved, particularly in childhood. He didn't go into elderhood much. In childhood, there are 5 basic stages we go through. And they're driven, according to Freud, by a psychosexual impulse. Now, in fairness to him, when he said psychosexual, it's not just raw sex. It means any pleasure principle whatsoever. So there's this battle that goes on between the id, which wants it and wants it now, and the superego that's trying to live within society's constraints. And so there's this battle that goes on, according to Freud. And so different body parts take up the struggle as far as Freud is concerned. So we start off with the oral phase. So everything that goes into the child's mouth, beginning with mammy's milk and then thumbs, pencils, whatever. So we try to pleasure ourselves through the mouth. The second stage, so that lasts for the first year. From about 1 to 3, we're in the anal stage. And the child is fascinated by poop and stuff like that. So we're fixated on that, according to Freud. The third phase goes from about 3 to 6, and he called it the phallic stage. You can figure out what that means for yourself. And then the fourth stage was from about 6 to 12. He called it the latency period, when we cool down a little bit. And then from 12 on, the genital period, and everything heats up again. So there was Freud's model, that's how life proceeds in 5 stages. Carl Jung, who started out as a disciple of Freud, broke with him and had a totally different agenda. Where Freud believed that it was the pleasure principle or sexuality that drove the human journey, Jung believed what he called individuation. Individuation, in some senses, it's really like the enlightenment process. So Jung believed that the basic drive in human beings is to try to mine the personal unconscious and the collective unconscious and bring them all to full consciousness. It's like the Buddhist notion of mindfulness. So I would say that when I read Jung stuff, it's like as if the archetypes that Jung describes are the DNA of evolution and the DNA of the cultural progress. So according to Jung, it's a very different agenda. That the whole project, the human project, is about moving toward enlightenment, and he called that individuation. A third great theorist would be, say, Jean Piaget, who was a Swiss psychologist, and he focused again just on the early childhood stuff. And he divided it up into 4 periods, so it's different cookie cutter. So for him, the first stage, he called it sensory motor. And this is about from age 0 to 2, according to him, when kids acquire knowledge through their senses and through moving. So they're drinking in information through their 5 senses, and as they start, they're learning, they're having experiences through the physical movement. So you put a little newborn on its back, it can't move, it's on its back. At some stage, it learns how to roll out onto its belly. At some stage, it's going to learn how to crawl. At some stage, it's going to pull itself upright, and then it's going to start walking and then running. So for the first 2 years, he called it the sensory motor phase. So the child is learning, through the senses and through action. The second stage, he believed, was from about 2 to 6, and he called that pre-operational, where the child is learning to think symbolically, so it's acquiring language skills. So that's the next phase for 4 or 5 years. Then the third stage, he called concrete operational, which is where the child develops the ability to think rationally or to use logical deductions. And then the final stage was from about 12 onwards, which he called formal, thinking. So now you can think abstractly, you can do mathematics, or you can play around with the notion of time. So that was Piaget's model. And then you had Erikson, who extended the trajectory right into old age. And if I can remember correctly, there were 8 different stages, beginning in infancy with the notion of trust versus mistrust. So a little newborn that's born into a family and environment very, very quickly has to decide, and obviously this is totally unconscious, can I trust this environment or should I distrust it? Is it safe to be here or not to be here? So that's the first battle of a little child. Is this place safe? Are my caretakers going to look after me? Am I living in an environment that I can really trust? The next stage then will be like 1 to 3. It's a potty training, so it's autonomy versus shame. So as the child is learning to control the bowel movements, depending on what happens, are the parents, chastising the child for, pooping in his pants or whatever, the child is going to develop autonomy or be really, really shameful. The next stage he believed was initiative versus guilt. Now your 5 and 6-year-old, they're beginning to explore the world a little bit. Are they going to be closed down? Or will they be allowed to develop their initiative? If they get closed down, they feel guilty about their actions. The next stage now, kids are gone to school, and so it's industry, versus lack of belief in themselves. What happens when they bring home their schoolwork, or they go to school, or they're being chastised, or getting lots of red marks? So that's going to affect. The next one then, early teenage years, would be identity versus role confusion. Do they really know who they are? Kids are growing now into puberty. They're trying to establish who they are. And in my opinion, our entire culture is stuck in that phase right now. Identity versus role confusion. As a culture, we're stuck at that place right now. So that would be the next phase. The next one then would be, so now you're a young adult. It's about intimacy versus isolation. Are you managing to create intimate relationships that allow you to feel special and to grow, or are you isolated from society? Further on in the life cycle, he called it generativity versus, help me out here, Connie, what was it? Generativity versus stagnation. And so now you're a grandparent and you want to become a mentor to the next generation. So you either, begin to take interest in your grandkids or the children of society, or you stagnate. You're stuck in a nothing job and you resent it. And then the last stage he called integrity versus despair. So now in your elder years, have you pulled all of the strands together and you have serenity and you're absolutely fulfilled because you utilize all your experiences and your talents to make a difference in the world? Or are you in total despair? You feel like it's a life that you wasted. So there will be the Eriksonian kinds of stages. And then the last one that you have to hit very quickly would be Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We've come across this model. So he's looking at how our needs change throughout the lifespan. So the first one is, physiological needs. You need food, and you need air, and you need water. So nobody is going to progress significantly in life if they don't have access to food. If they're scrambling for food and water, it's very difficult, to make any kind of progress as an individual or even as a society. If those needs are fulfilled, and you have enough food and water and air to breathe, the next need, he said, are safety needs. Do you live in a safe household? Or do you have alcoholic parents who make it very unsafe for you? Are you living in a neighborhood where people are carrying guns nonstop? So safety is the next great need we have, to be able to move around, in tranquility. The next stage then would be belonging. So now you have food enough, you're safe in your neighborhood. You need to belong, to feel you belong to some group, whether it's the family or the community or a tribe or a gang, whatever it is, that you need to be affiliated with somebody that thinks you're special. The fourth need, he believed, was esteem. So now you're food, you've got enough food, you're safe, you belong to a group. How do you now feel about yourself? Now you can start thinking about self-confidence or self-esteem, issues like that. And then finally, he said, there is self-actualization. Now you're free to fully develop all the talents you were born with and all the opportunities you were given. It's a little bit like Jung's notion of individuation. You're free now to flower. So there would be kind of the typical kinds of stages with different cookie cutters, dividing them up into different numbers of stages. So my second point then is I'm going to give a very simple theory of developmental psychology of my own, using a very simple little cookie cutter, which is basically a square. And my belief system is this, that every single one of us is born in total innocence. Every child is totally innocent. And that is that we meet life with this extraordinary curiosity. We ask these really, really, really profound questions, even if adults think they're stupid questions, like why is the sky blue? So we're filled with curiosity about life, and we're totally innocent. And whatever answers we're given, we accept that as the gospel truth. So innocence is that we're really curious about life, but we'll believe anything that authority figures feed to us. That's the first stage, I believe. I believe that somewhere in the early teenage years, there's a bifurcation point, and that idealism splits either into naivete or idealism. So innocence splits into either naivete or idealism. Now, naivete is age-inappropriate innocence. It's the 13 or 14-year-old who still is completely gullible and will swallow anything they're told. So that would be naivete. It is age-inappropriate innocence. The other part of that then is idealism. Idealism, it consists of two parts. It's the ability to recognize the shadow material in myself, my culture, in my world, but to focus the light on it. to want to make a difference, to want to heal it. I'm aware of what the issues may be in myself and in society, but I have the courage to confront it and to shine a light upon it. So this is what I mean by idealism. I believe that somewhere in the 30s, that idealism further bifurcates. And it goes either into cynicism and greed, because I've been there, done that, didn't work, so what's the point? So I'm just going to acquire as much stuff as I can because my idealism didn't work. So that I would call that soured idealism. And the other prong of that is that idealism can become wisdom and compassion. And I call that a matured idealism. I'm aware of the issues. I'm aware of the shortfall, but I'm still convinced that wisdom and compassion is the answer, not cynicism and greed. So that would be my kind of a simple model. And I believe then that where typically psychology debates whether or not the personality is basically nurture or nature, either genetics or environment. There's this long drawn out debate in psychology whether personality is the result of the genetics with which we were born. We're kind of pre-programmed and that's it. You can't do anything about it. Or we come in tabula rasa, an empty slate, and it's the environment that writes on the board and determines who we become. Now personally, I believe there's a third factor which is much more important than either of those two. Obviously, the environment is important and genetics is important, but the single most important factor, I believe, in the establishment of a personality is the soul that comes in with its previous trajectory of incarnational experiences. So every soul comes in with a totally different history. And so that determines, I think, much more than nature or nurture, what the personality will become. In April, I fostered 2 little kittens from the Sonoma rescue group, and I totally fell in love with them. So in May, I adopted them. One of them is called Callie, and the other is called Teddy. And they're sisters. They were from the same mother. She was wild. They captured these 2 little kittens, so I fostered them for a month, and now I'm their daddy for the last 3 months. They are totally different characters. Callie loves to be petted when she's on the ground, but she doesn't want to be held. And she spends most of her day sucking on a little blanket, nursing on a blanket, with the little kittens where they're kneading, blissed out, sucking on this blanket nonstop. Teddy is a little, to use a Yiddish phrase, a wilde chaya, a little wild animal. And she's running around the back garden, chasing flies and everything else. And she doesn't like to be petted, but she loves to be held and cuddled. So I can catch her like this, and I can rock her for 10 minutes at a time, and she's dead happy to stay there. So they're totally different personalities. The same genes, the same environment. I'm the daddy since the beginning, but totally different characters. And so, in some senses, I believe that it's the soul that comes in, which is the primary determinant of the personality that emerges. So personality basically is just the interface between essence and environment. And so I've seen this as a psychologist that over the years, you can take a young soul and put it into a very healthy body and into a very functional, loving family, and it'll screw up anyway. You can take an old soul and put it into a crippled body in a dysfunctional family, and it'll shine anyway, because it's the soul that's really determining the quality of the personality that emerges. So that would be kind of my own hit on a theory of developmental psychology. So using all those models now, I want to just trace a little bit part of my own journey, my own life journey. And I'm going to begin at age 18. So 3 weeks before my 18th birthday, I joined the seminary, St. Patrick's Missionary Society. It was September 14th, the Feast of the Holy Cross in 1964. And I go into the seminary, and I'm totally convinced that, I am the obedient servant of an infallible Pope who lives in Rome and is the vicar of Christ. He's Christ's voice on planet. I totally believed that to be the case. And I meet the Superior General of our entire congregation, a man called Peter O'Reilly. And particularly during the first high masses I attended. So all of the students are together. The older seminarians are dressed in soutanes and surplices, and the priests are saying mass. It was just coming to the end of Vatican II. And so now the altar is facing the people, and they're celebrating high mass with Gregorian chant. And I'm totally transported. And Peter O'Reilly, who is the superior general of the entire group, I see as an ethereal archangel. I really believe this man is an ethereal archangel. And then the priests who were educating me over the next 8 years, I'm totally convinced that these are angels, absolutely angels in human form. And I would watch them, go and say their private masses because it was just the end of Vatican II, bending over a little altar, over an alcove, pronouncing these Latin incantations that turned bread into God. I'm totally convinced, these are angels, in action. And then I looked at the older seminarians, guys who'd been there 4 or 5 or 6 years before me, and I see these guys, they're angels in training. And me, even myself, I'm now part of the assembly line for angel making. I'm going to become an angel as well, just like one of these guys. And then I start studying church history. I start looking around at the world around me, and the scales begin to fall from my eyes. And I see, that there's corruption everywhere. Now, most of these priests were extraordinary, great characters, and I worked beside many, many of them for 14 years in Africa. Fabulous guys. But there's the bad apples as well. And certainly in church history, there's a lot of bad apples, a lot of whom became popes in the process. We had one professor of history called Colm Cook, a very bright guy, but he affected a British accent. And it is very, very upper class, if you're English, to affect a stutter. So we're studying Alexander VI, who was a medieval pope. And Colm says, Alexander VI made many mistakes, one of whom was subsequently to succeed him to the papacy. And so you study church history, you come across these kinds of guys. So what happens? Somebody told me very, very early in my education, I still in high school, it was a Christian brother, and I don't know, apropos what, I can't remember. But he said, never allow yourself to be scandalized. Never allow yourself to be scandalized. And I thought about that when I started reading church history. I was prepared to be surprised. I was prepared even to be shocked, but I wouldn't allow myself to be scandalized. Because to be surprise and shock allow me to look at my illusions, and dismantle them and reach for a deeper truth. Scandal means I give up. I'm going to become a cynic, doesn't work. It's all a crock. I'm not going to go there. So I've never allowed myself to become scandalized by anything I've ever seen. But I know, things ain't what they appear to be. So what happens when you find out that things ain't what they appear to be? You can give up and become cynical about life, or you can dig much, much deeper. Because you have to realize that you and I are here by choice. There's not a single person on planet Earth who's here by accident. Every single one of us have chosen to be here now, to be part of the family into which we were born, to inhabit the spacesuit that I was born with, to be part of the culture that grew me up, to be part of planet Earth in 2019 with all of our issues. We chose to be here now because we volunteered to make a difference. So it's okay to be surprised. It's okay even to be shocked. But please never allow yourself to be scandalized. Never allow yourself to kind of become a cynic and say, nothing ever works. It's the same old crap again and again and again. You knew what you were coming here to do. You volunteered for it. So even if the team is, 5 points down right now and there's a minute to go, there's still time to turn it around. So it becomes very, very important. So then I look at Jung's work again. And Jung said that the shadow is 80% gold and only 20% darkness. So let me look at the darkness part of it first, and then the gold. So Jung believed that the unconscious is filled with 80% unrealized potential and 20% repressed traumata. So we certainly see evidence of that repressed traumata. When we look around the world right now, you look at a political system which is the pathological liars throughout it. You look at religions which are stifling spirituality very, very often. You look at a school system which, instead of educating kids, is dumbing our kids down. You look at a mass media which is, fake news in the employ of some kind of an oligarchy. You look at the medical model, which in fact is in thrall to the pharmaceutical industry and is not interested in healing illness, but in promoting it, prolonging it to sell more drugs to more people. You look at the agricultural industry, which is poisoning our world at the behest of some kind of an elite. And you look at the military-industrial prison complex, which is killing and incarcerating people, allegedly to promote freedom and democracy, but in fact at the behest of some kind of a corporatocracy. That's the bad news. That's the 20%. There's a shadow to not just the individual person, there's a shadow to the nation, and there's a shadow to the species. And this is what happens when the shadow of the species is not acknowledged and the light is not shone on it. But every culture, like every individual, is 80% unrealized potential. It is 80% gold, according to Jung. So we have to start looking for the gold and start mining the gold and harvesting the gold. As I say, every single one of us agreed to be here now. We knew exactly the situation we were coming in. So how can you begin to harvest the gold in your own personality? How can you begin to harvest the gold in the cultural inheritance? How can we begin to harvest the gold on planet Earth in the species Homo sapiens sapiens? We're at a bifurcation point as well as a species, as really as we bifurcated from Neanderthals to Homo sapiens at some stage. And I call that bifurcation point, we're either going to become Homo sociopathicus, where we continue to trash the world and the environment, or we become Homo spiritualis, where we take this journey to the very next level. So which one do you want to sign up for? Do you want to give up, throw your hands in the air and say, I give up, it doesn't work, and become cynical and greedy? Or do you want to become wise and compassionate? We have a saying in Swahili, ya Mungu ni mengi. From God are many things. In other words, God is full of surprises. So I find myself at this stage, almost 73 years of age, I find that I'm still Catholic, but with a small c, which means universal. I'm still Irish, but I'm part of a Celtic diaspora living in exile in Palo Alto. But the really good news is I still have an Irish accent. I'm one lucky bugger.